guys, so excited to finally be doing this. This is the first episode of the MetaRick podcast. For all of y'all that have been following my content or know who I am, you know that I've been absolutely obsessed with all things Web3 and this next era of the internet. So the podcast will be talking about a lot of things around blockchain, artificial intelligence, the metaverse, and extended reality. And so for today's call, we have Nate Essin here from Aquent Studios. His background as a creative in the consulting world with Accenture, IBM, and now with Aquent as an agency. He's touched a lot of different parts of this space, mostly on the creative side, a little bit on the technical side. And I'm so incredibly excited to hear his perspective on the industry and what's been going on.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
Nate, as we get started, maybe you could just share a little bit about your story. Like, what's your background? How'd you get involved in the space?
Yeah, so this started for me in my teens. I really was drawn to animation and creativity. I really couldn't draw as a kid. I tried really hard. And so I was like, maybe a computer can draw for me. So I started learning 3D graphics. That led to freelancing as in 3D graphics and ultimately working in film, where I've spent a lot of my career. Later on, I started my own studio after college, and then I got into the metaverse. I got my first virtual reality headset. I got bit by the bug hard, and it put me on a different path where I was like, I really want to be doing something with this, but for a living. And sold my company, made my way over to Accenture, where I got to work on some really cool projects. So I think we're going to visit that a little bit later in the podcast.
Did you sell to Accenture, or did you sell and then find Accenture later?
Yeah, so I sold my company, and then I found Accenture later. I spent some time at IBM and then went to Accenture, where I joined their XR team, which later became their Metaverse team.
Yeah, and that's a newer shift for Accenture, right? I think they started the Metaverse Continuum group about maybe almost 2 years ago. And so what was that transition like for you of kind of coming in before that Metaverse hype really started taking off? And then as they shifted the branding and the focus, like what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, so I was working inside of Accenture, and they were launching 60,000 headsets internally to their employees. And I was building experiences for people in the organization all around the world to be able to have events to attend and have something to do inside of virtual reality, and just get everyone familiar, with this concept of like, what's it going to be like working and collaborating in virtual reality? And, at that time, Meta had just changed their name, and there was this shift happening around the world, where people were saying, okay, whoa, Metaverse is real. Like, what does that mean for us? And Accenture started up their Metaverse Continuum business group, and then they started saying, okay, we're going to make some money with this now. And it was a transition to much more focus on our clients and what they could get out of it. And so I was there as they were transitioning from this kind of inward focus of how do we use Metaverse to how do we take what we've learned and bring it to the clients. And so I joined their thought leadership group and worked there to help to define kind of their point of view and how we talked about it, making it a little bit more palatable and explaining kind of the value that you get out of these products.
I think so many of the best technologies and services come from a similar process of like, let's build something for ourselves, and then we find it works so well, or that there's this opportunity that other people might use it too. AWS is one of the biggest examples of that, right? Like Amazon started building that for themselves and realized how game-changing it could be for everybody else. What were some of the things that you were focusing on internally before it kind of went external to using this for clients?
Yeah, so I was on our change management team, and I would say it's really interesting being inside an organization that large, where you have a team of people that's just focused on how do we change the behaviors to get people to adopt this technology, and get away from, thinking, oh, we can just schedule a video call, or we can just schedule a meeting and think, or we can schedule a flight and think instead we can schedule something in the metaverse. And so it was interesting being on that team and seeing how do you communicate with people about that, but also how do you enable a lot of people at once on something that is not intuitive in the least bit. It hasn't gotten any more intuitive since.
Sorry to cut you off, but what percentage of these people had actually used a VR headset before, or had ever tried anything like this prior to that program?
with the people that I spoke with, probably 1% or less. There's a lot of people that were middle-aged or people from, developing countries where this was brand new to them.
So that's got to be kind of a crazy experience, right? Like if you're working in VR programs with people that have used VR headsets and have kind of gotten used to the motion of it, and that because it can have kind of a jarring reaction to people at first, right? And it takes a little bit of time to get comfortable with the controllers and the buttons, especially if these are folks that aren't playing video games every day, right? Like they may not even be used to like the A versus the B button on a Xbox controller or something. What were some things that you did to try and kind of help onboard people or get them to feel more comfortable using this technology?
There was a lot of creating videos and making sure that you had the right processes in place for every meeting that you did have, because you would have the people that were regulars that would show up and they would know what to do, but then there would always be a group of people that were logging in for the first time. They might have had the box sitting there for a little bit, and then they said, okay, today's the day I'm going to power it up, follow the directions, and log in. And they're there, and sometimes they're sitting in the middle of the room, and decided that we were using AltSpace VR, which I know it's a platform you're familiar with. And you would see kind of a group of avatars in the center of the room where the spawn point was, and they would just all be stacked on top of each other. And you're like, oh, these people don't know how to move. And so you walk over there, and help them out. And what we had done was we created a community of people that were, we call them game changers, and they were dedicated to helping other people to get adjusted. And they would volunteer at every event, and they would be on a Teams call before to make sure, if someone got stuck getting set up, that they could help them through. And then inside the experience, they're helping them to learn to like move around, unmute yourself, things like that.
That makes a lot of sense to me, right? When you're dealing with an organization that has, I think it's up to like 700,000 employees now, like you almost have to create these little evangelists to help with new technology. And that's not unique to VR, by the way, right? Like I know VR gets a lot of flack for being this high barrier to entry, the expensive headsets, difficult to onboard and train people, but it's not the only technology that's like that, right? Like even with basic SaaS tools that might be a $10 a month per user subscription, you still struggle to get people to use it, right? Like in sales, the trope is always like update Salesforce. If it didn't happen in Salesforce, it didn't happen, right? So I think that that's not unique to the space. It's something that we're always going to struggle with any new technology. But did you find that, because Accenture's obviously invested a lot of resources and time into it, and I'm wondering if there's a particular use case you found that really started to take off the most, whether that's kind of broadcasting large presentations or collaborative kind of workshops, onboarding somebody new. Like, was there a particular use case you found was kind of taking off the most or being the easiest to get people on board with?
It was communities. It was people that were meeting each week, and they had a common interest. And there were communities of people meeting and sharing their interest in the metaverse and information around that. And then there was also people that were within a certain sector. Like we had a group that was really centered around the finance industry, and they would meet and show off decks and things inside of this immersive museum space, and they kept going back. It was really fascinating to see that.
So there's for me, like video chat, like even stuff like what we're doing right now with this kind of video interview, it really hasn't changed that much since Skype calls, like maybe 20 years ago, right? Like even a FaceTime on a phone, like it's become more accessible. It's become slightly better quality of the video fidelity and the audio. But as far as the engagement factor, it hasn't changed that much. And what do you think about these 3D spaces really draws people in, or like what's the added benefit that people are getting from it? It's more pressing is kind of the way that I would describe it. When you're inside of a virtual reality experience, and not necessarily metaverse, but virtual reality itself, where you have on the headset, the person in front of you appears solid. Even if they look like a simple avatar, you feel like you could reach out and you're actually going to touch something. And there's this sense when you're interacting with them of your personal space. They have their personal space bubble and you have yours.
and you navigate that as you interact with them. And even if you're in a headset that doesn't have face tracking, you still try to make eye contact because of your own physiology, the way that we're designed and built. And it is, it's just a really fascinating thing, and it's something that doesn't feel like a video call at all. It's as close as you can get to actually being in the room with someone else, because everything physiologically is telling you that you're actually in the room with that person. You can hear their voice coming from the direction you turn away. They're quieter, it's coming in your one ear. There's nothing like it, and it's hard to describe to someone who hasn't worn a headset.
Yeah, and just speaking from my own kind of anecdotal experience, because I've spoken at a few of these VR events where I'm in a headset giving a presentation, and I've also attended them and been to a lot of these kind of social events. It's interesting depending on your situation in the setting, right? So if you're an audience member, one of the things that I found the first time I did it is not just the engagement of seeing the body or like feeling that need to make eye contact, but also the removal of distractions, right? Like I'm in that conference hall, I'm surrounded by avatars, I'm looking at a stage with a big screen behind this person presenting their deck. I'm not in my living room or my workspace where I'm distracted by the 3 monitors that are around me and everything else that I could be looking at in my own house, or my husky running around wondering what she's getting into. Instead, I feel like I'm in that event space focused on that presenter or that group of people. Also, as a speaker, something I found too, and when I was working in the virtual event space, this is feedback I got all the time, is that speakers feed off the energy of a crowd, almost like a stand-up comedian or a live theatrical actor would. And when you're on a Teams meeting or you're on like a kind of a video call, it's challenging to read the room. Like you can't really pull the energy from just some emojis popping up in a corner, versus when you do have this large group of avatars in front of you, it feels more like you're on a stage. It feels more like a real presentation. And you've noticed I'm saying the word feeling a lot. And I think that's one of the biggest impacts, is like the way our brains work is we're such emotional beings. Like we react emotionally and then use logic to justify what we say, what we feel. And this 3D world, this environment kind of taps into that emotional state in a way that I think slide decks and Teams meetings and other forms of corporate communication have just never been able to do before. Have you felt that? Do you feel like that kind of, that feeling impact is there? Like it kind of gives someone like that sense of paying attention versus like a purely, I don't know, like I don't have any data, right? Like I can't look at any specific metrics that say why it's more engaging. It just feels like it is. And people get that sense of awe when they're in these spaces. Is that making sense? Yeah,
at the risk of being completely redundant, I'm going to say that I totally feel you. Like I get that as an audience member. The first time I went to someone giving just a PowerPoint presentation inside of virtual reality, I was like, this is going to be boring. I don't want to go. And then when I showed up, I was like, you have all of your senses replaced. And when you do that, your brain has no choice but to believe that you're actually in this place. And when you're there, you're like, okay, I'm looking at like a 50-foot screen. There's a presenter at the front, and it's the same feeling you have whenever you go to a conference. You're surrounded by people, and you're like, okay, I guess I better like sit up straight and pay attention, And it's really quite something compared to a video call where I'm just like, okay, turn my camera off, check my texts. What did he say? And then I've also, like you, I've also spoken actually quite a bit inside of virtual reality spaces as a part of my role at Accenture. And I agree with you 100%. Like you actually get this feeling of connecting with the audience. And after you do it for a while, you're like, you can start to read the audience. I do have, like, I remember one time I was speaking and I started hearing this slow and low regular sound coming from the crowd. And you hear all kinds of things like pots and pans, dogs barking, kids. But it was a guy who had fallen asleep with his headset on. I was like, okay, you need to do better. But yeah, you could also feel like, okay, like people are laughing, like I'm connecting with the crowd, and like this is working or this is not working, And then people who are really experienced audience members will be like throwing up emojis and stuff in the air, and you're like, okay, this is hitting home.
And I completely feel you. It sounds like we've had a similar experience in these environments. The one thing I found a little tricky, and I'm not sure if you have seen a solution for this or if you have thoughts on it, is audio latency. So that's the one thing, like, even like I came from being a film guy, just like you came from working with some film as well. and audio is always more important than visual. Like if you're making a movie that's going to get played in a movie theater, bad video you can recover from with good writing, good story, good other things. But bad audio, and people immediately disengage and they pull out of the story. The way that ties into VR is that I find that there's a latency issue a lot of the time when you're talking to somebody, being able to actually jump in at the right moment, like knowing when it's your turn to talk or be able to kind of pace the conversation. The timing is a little wonky compared to in real life. Have you felt that?
Totally. But I've also felt that on video calls, I just kind of accept that.
That's just part of virtual communications for now.
Yes, as long as the speed of light stays constant, we're going to continue to deal with this.
Fair enough. Yeah, maybe that's something where AI can come in. I mean, I don't know enough about AI to really be sure, but I know there's been talk recently about the advancements of voice AI, not just ChatGPT with text and DALL-E 2 and Midjourney and things like that with visuals. But there's a lot of work being done with AI translations, with AI to match someone's voice, be able to replicate the same sound and tone, same emotional state. So maybe there's something where AI can predict what you're about to say right before you do or something, be able to help solve the latency issue.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, because like you said, I've played with some of the voice enhancement AI. It's bonkers. And you know, if you have the Oculus Quest, which I believe you do, that platform uses AI to determine where your controllers are, but also to predict where your controllers are going to get rid of latency, which sounds insane. It's just like predicting the future, and your gameplay is coming out of a prediction, not even your own movement.
Well, and that's where I was just listening to a talk with, so embarrassing, I'm going to forget his name right now, the guy running OpenAI, Sam something, I think. But he was talking about how he thinks that prompt generative AI is like a stepping stone. He doesn't want prompts to be the future of how generative AI functions. He actually was talking about a potential, and you never know because this is like the next stone and so much could change in the next 5 years, but he's talking about the idea of almost like a unique AI algorithm for each individual, where it can essentially know you so well and know what you're going to say or going to do so well that you don't need to be this perfect prompt engineer where you get the wording just right to get the result you want, but rather you can just communicate naturally, and then that'll be a good enough prompt to get the results you're going for. But I think we're a ways off. I think the first step is going to be really mastering these prompts. But I think that's a good segue into ChatGPT. I know this is something we really wanted to talk about. It's taken over the internet. What has your experience been like with ChatGPT so far? And do you have any thoughts on where it might go?
Yes. So I think like everybody on the internet, I had, a moment of using ChatGPT and then people sending me screenshots of them using ChatGPT. And just as an example, I guess for our listener, the platform allows you to input text and chat with it as you would with anybody else, except it does whatever you ask it to do. So I have a sister, she's a writer, and she's been using it to send her entire outline. And by the way, it doesn't seem to have a text limit because I've sent it some really long prompts. She's sending an outline for a book and then saying, is my protagonist following the hero's journey? And then it's coming back with literary critique and then telling her line by line where she needs to change that outline so that her protagonist follows the hero's journey. I have another friend who has a rare disease. She's had issues for her entire life, and just this year she was diagnosed with this disease that only a handful of people in the world have. She put her symptoms in a ChatGPT and she was like, I've been experiencing blah, blah, blah. Like, what could this be? And then it came up and it said the disease name. Like, first thing, I was like, I'm pretty sure it's this. And so she wrote it like 3 different ways. And each time it came back with that disease. And she's like, this is better than any doctor I've ever been to. And I think, when I first started playing with it, I had a moment, where I'm just like lying awake, like staring at the ceiling and just thinking, wow, if a computer can do that, who am I? Like, what's my place in this world? I listened to a podcast recently with the head of AI for Tesla. He interviewed with Lex Friedman. That's an amazing podcast, but an amazing episode that you need to check out. Ricky, have you seen this episode or listened to it?
I haven't seen that episode, but I love Lex Friedman. I think his technical knowledge and his ability to like remain really objective and just kind of pull information from people. Like even Kanye, he's the best at being able to just be patient with Kanye out of anyone I've ever
He was so
seen.
patient with Kanye. It's a hard episode.
I'm just trying to be your friend, man. I'm like watching like one of my childhood heroes fall apart. But anyways, we'll save Kanye for a non-podcast conversation.
Yeah. So the thing is, the guy. So I'm sorry, I don't recall his name, but the former head of AI for Tesla started at Tesla when their cars had an AI system, but they could barely drive a straight line. So it's just lane keeping. And if the road starts to curve, he said it would just fly off the road. So he took it from that system in 5 years to an autonomous system that is better than any autonomous system right now on the planet, because it doesn't have to have any of the cities mapped out for it or anything. It's just going where it needs to go based on a destination and based on the current road that it's looking at. But one of the things he said about ChatGPT was, he was like, it's a great model, and it depends on the data that you put in to train it. And right now, ChatGPT has a lot of very general data that's just scrubbed from the internet. And he said, what if we took every scientific paper that's ever been published, peer-reviewed, put it in there, and then we asked it a question like, how do you end human aging? And even if it couldn't give you an answer, it could probably set up the next things that you would need to do in a lab to research that question and head in the right direction.
No, I think that's, so you mentioned a couple different use cases there, right? So you mentioned the medical use case, which I hadn't heard before, and I think that's super interesting given the movement into telehealth, and a lot of people are starting to do more automated diagnosis through forms and intake, and putting something like a GPT model with AI into that makes a lot of sense to me. But then you also mentioned this idea of like the future of science and pointing us in the right direction for innovation. I'll throw a couple more examples. There's the Do Not Pay is offering $1 million for any lawyer who's presenting a case in front of the Supreme Court to put on a pair of AirPods and repeat the words that this AI algorithm puts out to argue the case. They're already using it for traffic tickets and like more basic things, but they're trying to get that global stage to show that the future of law can be driven by AI. And this is where it starts to become a really interesting philosophical thing, right? Is like you train these AI to do certain things, but at what point are we removing the human action from these things, right? Like I think a lot of it is great for brainstorming in the creative world at the moment, and like I think people curating the resources we get back, there's a lot of value from that. But I mean, legal precedent is literally how we dictate our social values and the structure of society. The second we hand that to something that's non-human, that's a big thing to be giving up. I'm not saying we shouldn't. Like maybe that is the future of world peace and solving the hunger issue and trying to build the most perfect world. Maybe we're not brilliant enough to do it, and we need AI to be able to accomplish those amazing, unbelievable goals. But I have also realized that, at least in my network, most of the content I'm seeing is so bullish on it, that it's moving so fast and so much money is going into it, that if it's kind of following the trend that Facebook, Google, and Amazon did of like move fast, break things, just innovate, get it in front of customers. And that's where we've got this whole product-led growth movement. Like that's how most tech has been built the last 20 years. Just throw it out there, make mistakes, fix it. But with AI, I feel like the stakes are a lot higher, where if you'd put it out there, the thing you're breaking might be unfixable. Like it might ramp up so quickly that we can't come back from it. So I guess like, what are your thoughts on where we should move the fastest versus where we should maybe be a little bit more cautious, and kind of like, is there a way to pump the brakes a little bit, as exciting as all these ideas are?
Yeah, you read my mind. Like certainly one of my biggest complaints about it, and I think for the foreseeable future, is that it's not going to ever be something that can provide us with truly original thought, in the sense that you're going to get a really great creative campaign out of it or a really great idea. It's just going to mash together things that people have already done. So that said, though, when it comes to analytical work, it is better than any human being. Anything that you can take and apply a logical process to based on data, it's way better at, and law is one of those things. Then going back to what the next thing that you said, it is very scary. Like I was talking about with the science thing. Like once you can build off of everything that's ever been published, you have something that's able to do meta-analysis on every study ever and do something that would take any researcher multiple lifetimes. That means that very soon we're going to see technology take off on another paradigm shift in growth, which is something that I know that technology accelerates, but it's something I didn't quite anticipate, especially following the, what do you call that? Whenever we've been doubling the transistors on the chips, that stopped happening. So I was like, we're okay now. And it's just going to level out. This is society now. Nope.
Well, and this still might slow down because of that, right? In order to process and power these AI engines, especially once GPT-4 comes out, it's going to be gnarly. You need to have the hardware to support the infrastructure of all these things. And so,
but not running it, right? Isn't that only for training it?
I'm not technical enough.
Okay.
I was gonna say some bullshit. And then
it's multiple cities worth of power to train these things. I know that.
Yeah, well, I just saw an interesting debate, and we can always pivot off the AI thing and back into extended reality. But just while we're on the topic, I saw an article that just came out talking about open source versus private investment in these things. And the idea that open source is really the direction that a lot of this Web3 movement is going towards. A lot of things like DAOs and community forward building of new technologies. And with AI, there's a lot of debate about why that's important philosophically, because if you have one country or one set of values dictate all of these technologies, then that's going to have all these biases kind of baked into the tech, versus if you have a global open source community of people building it together, then it's something more inclusive and helps cancel out some of those biases. Do you have a take on... Well, sorry, one last thing is the funding, though, for some of this technology is kind of almost impossible open source, right? It could take maybe $100 million plus to really build out the training models for some of these engines. And so I'm wondering if you have a take on open source versus private, kind of the pros and cons of one versus the other.
Yeah, I think in this situation, open source is going to lead. That's it.
Cool. Yeah, and like I said, if we're going deep, I know AI wasn't the forefront of what we were planning to talk about today, but as exciting as the GPT stuff is lately, I figured we got to at least touch on it. So let's pivot back into talking about extended reality, immersive technologies.
Can we connect that to open source?
I think we totally can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you said something about Unity and Unreal, right?
Yep, that's exactly where I was going. Same wavelength.
Okay.
Well, yeah. So let's just dive into your take on that. So Unity is kind of the incumbent. Unreal is kind of the new one coming in. Why should someone who's... I've got so many thoughts on this. So let's do one and then the other. So I want to look at this from a corporate sense of a company looking at it, but I also want to look at this from a creative who's just starting to learn how to build and play with these worlds, which direction they should go. But let's start with the corporate. If I'm the CMO of a Fortune 100 company and I'm building an immersive metaverse unit in my company, is there a reason I should lean more towards Unreal or more towards Unity?
So there's a train going by. Do you edit these?
Probably not the first... The first 10 or so is just getting them out there, starting the show. Over time, the production value might go up, but we'll see.
Okay.
If there's anything specific that you're hey, I'm going to get fired, I shouldn't have said that, then we'll just call it out and we'll pull it.
So far, we're good. Okay, so diving into the answer. Right now, I'd recommend that anyone getting started learn Unreal. Unity has taken some steps recently that have made their developer community very upset. And part of that involves the recent sale to an organization that a lot of people don't have a lot of respect for because they sell a lot of adware, which is literally installing viruses on your computer. And then they're recently transitioned the direction of their company to do more work in the enterprise space with things like digital twins. I believe at this moment that they're positioned well for that, but there are already other organizations like Nvidia with Omniverse that have quite a head start and a very, very robust platform that's built for that. Unity is trying to juggle a lot of balls right now in terms of what their platform can do. And the platform has a lot of criticism because very simple scenes use a ton of resources on the developer side. So, I mean, anyone getting started, I would just say, like, dive into Unreal, especially if you don't have a high-end machine or you don't know how to optimize a scene. Like, Unreal does a lot of that work for you.
So where did you start? And by the way, were you ever working in like Unity or Unreal on a day-to-day basis? Like, is that one of your core skills, or is that more of like a side skill set for you?
I would not define it as either. There was a point that I was working in it every day, though. So my background is in 3D graphics and animation. I really wanted to be a character animator, and that's what I learned. When I came to Accenture and we were doing all of those events, I did a lot of work inside of Unity, both for interactive objects for events and also the spaces where we hosted events. So creating event spaces, literally like designing like a video game level. And a lot of that work happens inside of Unity. And once you have the models from another platform, for me, it's Blender. I love Blender. And then I also created like interactive objects. Like, for instance, we had an event that celebrated the Indian holiday. I'm probably going to say it wrong. It's either Holi or Holi. But
I'm not going to know.
Okay, do you know that holiday though?
I do not. No.
So it's a Hindu holiday, and what they do is they throw colored powder at each other.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Okay,
it's a beautiful celebration. This, yeah. I'd never even heard of it. And then we got this request to do this event from the Hindu ERG, which is an employee resource group. And then I watched some videos on YouTube, and I was like, that looks so cool. That should be a thing. We need to do that here. But when so they basically came to us and they're like, can you make it so that we can throw paint at each other? And we were working inside of AltSpace VR, and I won't get too technical here, but basically you can't. But you can make it so that you can wear anything on any part of your body. So I set up these little paint pots. They're like filled with like, it looked like there's powder on top of them with different colors. And then you would walk up to it and then squeeze the trigger on your controller, and then it would apply paint to a different part of your body. And as it went on, like, there would be like an explosion of powder around it, and it made this sound. And then you'd have like paint on your hand or on your face or on your body. And so we celebrated Holi inside of virtual reality. It was a lot of fun. So yeah, that was the kind of thing that I was doing in Unity.
That is so cool. I love stuff like that. I think that the collaborative nature of the metaverse is so interesting, and having these kind of ways of tying culture in globally, right? Like imagine if like you went to that every year and you grew up in India and that was such a big celebration, and then you move to America and whatever city you're in doesn't do anything like that, or you haven't found that niche here, but you had a way to experience it. You had a way to get like at least a taste of that world. And as the graphics get better and as things kind of continue to improve, it'll only get more and more lifelike. Like it reminds me of this Armenian woman. She was like in I think her late 90s, and her church that she grew up in, I don't know if it just doesn't exist anymore or if it was during the whole Azerbaijan attacks, but the church isn't there. And there was a digital twin of it in VR, and there's this adorable video of her like crying because she's so happy to be back in that space and get to experience it again. Even though it's not real anymore, she could never go back in person. And I think that there's something so powerful about maintaining culture through these digital twins and experiences.
Yeah, I have a friend who is from Mexico, and she brings her VR headset with her to family gatherings and shows them different places, like here's where I grew up, or they show, their neighborhoods and things. And it's a really powerful moment for them whenever they do that. And she even took me through it, and she's like, here's where I grew up in Mexico. And it was the Wonder app. I don't know if you've ever used that. Mm-hmm. I hadn't used it before, and I was just like, it's just going to be Google Earth in VR, or maybe Google Earth, like Google Street View in VR. And I was like, how cool could that be? Like, that sounds kind of boring. But I got in it, and I got sucked into it because, when you're there, it surrounds your entire field of view, and then she's telling you the story about it. So suddenly this place has meaning, and it was it was a really powerful experience.
Totally. It's and just as like I think that's so important because guys like you and me, like we're so deep in this, right? So we're bullish on it, we're excited about it, we're building it. But it's important to remember that this isn't like a full 180 on where we come from. This is just kind of a natural next step in the process of innovating. And what I think of when I think of these moments of like sharing where you come from or putting someone in that environment, I was talking with a friend the other day where we were looking at each other's phones and we were talking about these philosophical ideas and started talking about stories of moments in our life where we felt something related to that idea. And we just pulled our phone out and just started going through photos of showing those moments to each other. And I'm like, wow, this phone is like a window into your life. Like you're showing me these parts of your life as you talk about them. And with VR, it takes that just a step further, right? Like these are things we already do culturally. And we're just, instead of showing you a window to it, we're just taking you into that moment or into that space and showing it to you. And removing the distraction of everything else, because once you're in that headset, you're actually there. You're just focused on that memory that's being described to you. Powerful stuff. But let's go back to the question, Unity versus Unreal, right? Okay, so for Unity versus Unreal, you mentioned Unreal's the one you'd recommend anyone learning dive into. But you also mentioned Nvidia Omniverse. And I know Nvidia's talked a lot about this idea of USD or creating like a standard file type to drive interoperability. I'm not technical enough to know all the details around it, but what are your thoughts on this idea of interoperability? Do you think we're going to end up in all these different walled gardens of different 3D file types, or how are we going to find that like JPEG file or that kind of way of blending these different technologies together?
Yeah, so NVIDIA Omniverse is more of a DevOps platform than it is a game engine. So it's a tool to connect all of your content creation and experience into a single pipeline, so that if you have people who are working in CAD and then you need to get what they're making to marketing, and then they're going to be using the 3D assets to show previews on the website or immersive shopping or anything like that, then they're the platform that's going to form that bridge that's going to happen there. And then let's again go down to CAD. So if the CAD people are now going to get their product manufactured, then you can send it to manufacturing, and they're going to have their own digital twins of their manufacturing operations and everything. And now they're going to reconfigure those to say, okay, here's how we're going to create this product, this virtual product. Now it's going to become a physical product. And then whenever they start manufacturing, now they can see that happening in real time with their version of things. And so NVIDIA Omniverse is quite literally that name, Omniverse, where it's just this connecting tissue across everything in an organization so that they can all be connected to the metaverse, and with a minimum amount of human intervention, allow everything to flow really smoothly. It is, it's really powerful, and it's complex, and I don't know if anyone is fully utilizing every part of it quite yet, and I don't know if it's completely fleshed out either. But that being said, Mercedes just switched all of their factories over to NVIDIA's platform earlier this year, and that's big. It means that not only are they previewing how they're going to manufacture a vehicle and reconfiguring things so they have the perfect setup, and then can take that to their stakeholders and say, okay, it's going to take us this amount of money to begin manufacturing next year's vehicle. But they can also see that happening in real time and then, check up on things or communicate about operations. It's powerful.
Definitely. And it makes sense for Mercedes too. I think the automotive industry is one of the furthest ahead in all of this stuff that I've experienced, at least. Something about having a really big, expensive, complicated product, and they lost out on some of the benefits of e-commerce, right? The first car websites were horribly made. They were basically benefiting employees for dealerships more than they were benefiting customers, just trying to help with the employees' manual work of going through a checkout process. But through the investment that they've been doing over the last 10 to 20 years in car configurators and 3D immersive ways of changing the colors and the wheels and playing around with those systems, that's the way they've been able to really take advantage of the internet. And so I think now we're just seeing a lot of other brands leaning into that same thing. One of the things
I'm still waiting for a car configurator that has a real-time 3D inside of a browser. If you find one, send it to me. I've been looking for one.
I mean, I'll after this, I'll definitely send you a few resources. It's
Okay.
something that it came up so frequently. Like I would say I've met with, I don't know, probably 10 to 20 of the largest auto manufacturers to talk about this stuff.
I've checked all the majors and the supercars, and I haven't found one yet. They're all like images that are either being like rendered by the server when you do it, or they're just pre-stored.
Okay, interesting. Let's have that as a side conversation after, because I'm going to want to pull up some stuff for you. But one of the things you mentioned when you're talking about the Nvidia Omniverse is this idea of it being like almost a central hub of technology, and I think that we're going to end up with brands having central teams that are responsible for these things, right? Like, because it's not going to touch one department. 3D files and experiences are going to be used for marketing, but they're also going to be used for supply chain and logistics. They're also going to be used for onboarding new hires. A lot of things we've already touched on a little bit here and there. So you're going to need a team of people to kind of provide those services. And at first, relying on people like the Accentures and like the Aquent Studios, like the companies that are providing these services, are going to be vital for that. But what are your thoughts on a company creating that team? Like, what are the key skill sets that they need to be hiring for if they're building an immersive team?
There's something in your question that I want to address before we get to that. And it's not that it's a bad question; it's a great question. But there's this concept that that I feel like is challenging, especially for people that are just now learning about the metaverse, and that is this idea of like, what good is the metaverse? Like, what good is an NFT to me, or what good is a virtual environment? And if you try to make a value case for each individual thing, it can be challenging, especially if it doesn't apply directly to what someone needs today. But when you start thinking about how each one of these things has the ability to change the way that we are communicating and working inside of every part of an organization, and also every part of life, to where, you know, you're shopping and playing and everything else, then as an organization, you're thinking more in terms of this omniverse kind of approach, where you're saying, you know, the old way of doing things between paper, pen, mouse, and keyboard, you know, in the old internet, is now transitioning to this model of metaverse. So when we're thinking about building experiences for you know, someone applying for a job and then getting a job and onboarding, and then the work that they do within an organization wherever they are, and how they themselves are creating customer experiences, and you're thinking about every touch point for a customer of your organization and how tokenization could help them or help the products and benefit your customer as well. You know, then when you're thinking holistically about these things and where you get the benefits of each part of what you do in business, then it really starts to click. And the organizations that are embracing this, companies like Nike, for instance, and Mercedes, are getting a lot of value out of it. And even in the areas where you're doing something that doesn't have a real ROI, like immersive learning, for instance, you can still look at your return on investment in non-dollar amounts. Things like, how many lives did we save because this is a very dangerous work environment, and now we've switched to immersive training. So I just wanted to say that this is something that's been on my mind lately.
No, I'm glad you did, because I think my question was a more tactical question. We'll revisit it in a second. But before getting into the tactical side of how do you build a team around it, understanding the importance of it is a better place to start that conversation, I think. And I love that Nike is one of the examples you listed, because I think they've done the best job of this, at least on the consumer brand side that I've seen. There's a guy, Eric Redmond, on the technical innovation team. He founded the technical innovation office at Nike, and he wrote a book called Deep Tech that I'm just going to go ahead and give a little shout out to real quick, because that book dives into the 7 emerging technologies that he believes could potentially change the world, right? Like, they seem barely feasible today, they seemed impossible yesterday, and then tomorrow they could be so integral to society that we can't even imagine living without them, right? I think that's paraphrasing an MIT quote on how to define deep tech and this type of technology. But the ones he dives into are like quantum computing, blockchain, 3D printing, extended realities, and this kind of idea of immersive world building. But the core theme of the book, outside of those specific techs, is he's talking about how CEOs need to be tech forward. It doesn't matter if you run a car company, if you run a consumer goods company, It doesn't matter if you're an actual technology company. If you're any sort of business today, you need to be tech forward and be focusing on innovating, because technology is too important to everything we do now. It's how we collaborate and are able to work remotely. It's how we schedule and manage all of our workflows and our processes. It's how we manage our accounting. Like, it has touched every part of how we live our lives. And if you're not thinking about innovating in technology, then you're going to fall behind. You're going to have massive issues like Southwest just did with their scheduling system or over the holidays. It was a problem they already had, and then blizzards made it worse, right? And so I think this metaverse example is one of those things. It's new to the point where it's not completely proven, but when you experience it, you get that feeling of why it's important. And it's something that needs to be thought of carefully, but invested in and experimented with. Same thing with AI, right? Like, all of these things, we don't know what the finish line will look like 10 years from now. But we're in a stage where the start line's already been defined by people like Nike and Gucci, by brands like Accenture and Media Monks and Aquent, and like companies that are really thinking about how do we build a program around this? How do we build use cases for it? And that start line is the key. If you define the start line, then you can start experimenting and start figuring out what works. But none of us are going to be able to predict exactly what it is 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I think anyone who says that is, you know, the type of guy that's probably selling you snake oil, like trying to pretend like they know more than they do. But that said, realizing the importance of these technologies, realizing that they're worth investing in. How do you start? Like when you're thinking about defining that start line, like for a brand, what would you recommend they do if they're kind of just kind of beginning their journey?
Yeah. So for brands that are looking to start, I would actually, you know what? I want to take a step back and go back to your earlier question about people. I think we need to address people first. Okay. So I'll just go ahead and say, you know, that if you're looking to build a team of people that can deliver on Metaverse, like, what does that look like? Was that your question?
Yeah, and honestly, I think it applies, right? Like, if you're thinking about use cases, you need to understand the type of people, because the reality is, like, the use case is probably going to be slightly different depending on the company and the brand. But if you have the right people, they can help you find the right use case. So what would you start with, would you say, are like maybe the top 3 skill sets?
So this is a question that has been on my mind a lot, because I've been building a Metaverse studio at Aquent Studios. And for one thing, I would say that as an organization, like you said, you need to have a tech forward CEO. And that's part of it, but also having a culture where you're encouraging people to try things. And that's easy to say, but if you are talking about something where, you know, you mentioned ChatGPT in a conversation. Well, have you tried it out, you know? And then having that qualifier of, if you're going to be talking about this, you need to have at least like booted it up and tried it out, you know? That's a big thing within a company culture, so that people aren't just talking, but they're users and they're talking knowledgeably. The next thing is you're looking for people, especially today, who are creative technologists. For some technologies right now in Metaverse, it's really important that you start experimenting as a brand and as an organization. And you may not necessarily see the results of your investment, so you need to be experimenting in a small way. You need to say, okay, we're going to try this, and then we're going to see if it's something that we want to keep doing. We want to see if people adopt it and they use it and they get value out of it. And then if so, that's when you scale it, right? And so you're launching a bunch of small experiments. And so to do that, you need to have people on your team who are creative technologists, people who are good at creativity and design, but also have a little bit of engineering in their background. You're looking for Imagineer types, people who have hobbies. And so that's kind of where things start. And then after that, I would be looking at studios as well. So when you're doing specific brand activations on platforms, like if you were going to be doing something on a Roblox or a Fortnite, even with the very best talent in the world on your side, it's going to be difficult to be successful. And the reason for that is because you have to be able to engage with the communities that are in those experiences. So if you have the best designers in the world, or the best 3D animators, 3D modelers, or the best developers, you're not going to get a lot of mileage out of that, because there's a culture that's operating on a Fortnite or a Roblox, and there's people that spend a lot of time there. They know how to speak it. They know how to design for it. There's certain experiences on Roblox that you would just never guess, like an obby. That's a nickname they have for obstacle courses. So I don't usually think of going to go play obstacle courses online, but the Roblox community does. So once you understand what that community likes and what they engage with and how they communicate, that's whenever you can start to design for that. And there are highly specialized studios of really young people that grew up playing these experiences and can design for them, that are performing really, really well in that space.
So I think there's kind of two different topics that we're kind of touching on right now. One is the type of skills, the type of personas that you want to work with, and then the second is where you find them. So there's the ability to like hire someone full time and start building out what that in-house studio muscle looks like, and I think that is going to be the most challenging. That's going to probably take years. It's not going to happen in a couple of months. Like that's something that's going to take a brand a lot of time and experimentation to get that team right. There's freelancers to bring on for specialized campaigns, and then there's these niche studios that you're talking about that have really mastered a particular platform or a particular piece of the never-ending puzzle of technical innovation and where the stuff's going.
Yeah, so for virtual experiences, they look very similar to video game development. But if you're talking about doing a digital twin or something, you need people with industry expertise that are a part of that team, and you need everyone aligned to what exactly you're doing. And then if you're designing for the blockchain, you need people with heavy development backgrounds, people who know how backends work, how things get, how transactions are processed. So it's a really big multi-pronged problem, and in order to work with it right now, you have to find really rare talent that is multi-talented, because you'll be pivoting a lot.
So there's kind of three main skill sets that I think were the biggest that stood out to me. One is like technical awareness, right? Like if you're hiring a developer, obviously technical expertise, but someone who understands the technical infrastructure of what's going on, because it's so early in the process. You have to understand, because you're kind of building in flight, right? Creative, open-minded, kind of almost visionary-esque, this kind of entrepreneurial spirit. And then the third is also like, you talk about it as like from the industry, been around for a bit. I think also excitement for the industry ties into that a little bit, because there's a lot of folks that might have only been around 6 months or a year and a half, and they already know more than half the world does about any of this stuff, right? And so I think that excitement to learn, people that are spending that time trying to get as much information about this as possible is key. How do you go about finding those people? Like, you're in the process of building a team at the moment. Like, when you're thinking about trying to find someone who checks those boxes, like, where does your head go of like, how do I find that person?
Can we skip this question?
Yeah.
I literally just met with our recruiting team today, and we are forming a strategy.
Cool. No
Kinda
worries.
Not my problem.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I mean, that's ideal, right? Like, you have
Yeah.
people that have mastered the skill of finding people, have them go out and find the people for you, right?
Yeah. Sorry about that. I don't know much about recruiting, and my immediate impulse is just to think my network, but that doesn't scale.
No, it doesn't. And well, so to take it back to thinking about the people, right? Like, when you're thinking of that paper that you hand to the recruiter, or that kind of direction you give them to go find the right people, something else that seems to be a pattern in the words you're saying is like a really broad skill set. Like, you're looking to hire specialists for campaigns, but the people that you're bringing to your team, you're looking for people that can wear multiple hats and kind of dive into different sides of the industry. Is that right?
This is a big it depends, right? So if you're looking to launch something in enterprise and create something that is very robust and industrial that's going to have to scale from day one, you need to get a massive team in place with the right ecosystem partners to deliver that. And you need to have specialists. Almost everyone needs to be a specialist aligned around the product that you're building, right? if you're a marketer and you're trying to leverage things like tokenization and augmented reality experiences, that's whenever you're going to be working with these broad skill set generalists, because you'll be pivoting a lot and you'll be trying different experiments until you've got something that's like, oh, we got a little traction with this, like let's scale it.
I see. Okay, so it depends a little bit on the type of company, the type of team that you're looking to build. Now, let's say you get the team together. You've got the skill sets internally. What are the things that you would be thinking about if you're trying to find the right use case to start with? Because there's a lot of places, right? Like we've talked about the difference between sales and training and logistics. There's so many places to start. I don't think it makes sense for a brand to try and boil that entire ocean and do it all right off the bat. How would you go about trying to figure out where a brand should start? Because it's different for every brand, but like that discovery process.
So we're talking about a brand that's wanting to launch in the metaverse, and where do they start discovering, like where the needs might be?
Yeah, like let's think about it like they've just developed a think tank, right? They've found like 3 or 4 people that are like these amazing creative visionaries that understand the technology. They've kind of got that little task force together to try and figure out how to get started, because they know that they want to invest in this exploration, but they're just not sure where it's going to go yet. How would you manage that conversation if you had those people? Like what would be your process to try and get the best ideas?
What I would do would be to look at, there's two approaches. The first is find out what the pressing issues are and then determine, is there a solution that will orient them towards the future, give them a competitive edge over their competitors so that they're already operating the way that they need to be operating while everyone else is still operating in the Stone Age, and get ahead that way. The second approach is to take the use cases that we've identified so far, and there are use cases that really, really work with metaverse technology, and then go through your operations and then determine where you can apply it and what's going to be the biggest benefit use case. And you would do that alongside every part of your organization, down through sales and customer experience and everything, until you say, okay, well, our customers are dealing with a lot of fraud in the secondary market. So what if we authenticate the goods on a blockchain, like Prada did, things like that. It's a matter of identifying those use cases and then saying, where are we going to get the biggest return on investment? And a lot of these experiments, especially on the consumer side, deal with getting customers who are educated about really niche topics, especially when you're talking about Web3 and tokenization and things like that, or connecting your wallet up to have an experience. And there's you have to be very clear about the way that you're communicating and the way that you're communicating the benefits of that experience and engaging people so they come back and continue to have that experience. And then a lot of that, so that you're dealing with the education side of it. And then I just remembered the story about buying an NFT, and then I forgot the next thing I was going to say.
No worries. Well, so there's something you said actually that I kind of want to touch on. So you mentioned this idea of tokenization, NFTs, blockchain, and also this idea of metaverse and building on platforms and experiences. Now, especially when we're talking about like building a team or going on a process of the right use case, like solving fraud and verification of products with an NFT is so drastically different than people engaging with each other remotely, right? So there's this overlap between the blockchain and between 3D experiences, and I think that we saw them both build hype around each other in a way where a lot of people think that they're one and the same thing. I know I personally have had a lot of people talk to me about FTX crashed. Are you really sure about this metaverse stuff? And I'm like, well, FTX actually doesn't have much to do with the metaverse. It's kind of a totally different thing, more in the DeFi space of the blockchain, if anything. So I'm wondering what your take is on how you separate metaverse from blockchain and where the benefit of blockchain or what its place is when it comes to metaverse.
I think for the last couple of generations, we have been, and I mean generations of people, our lives have been increasingly virtualized, and we are accustomed to thinking about data in terms of something that can be stored and operated upon. And we continue to find more and more things in our world that are physical and then bring them into a virtual space. Like you and I witnessed the death of Blockbuster, and now we rent and stream everything online on our mobile devices we can carry with us wherever. Can't carry around a VCR. And we are living in this world that is getting more and more virtual. And so the metaverse is kind of this transition away from a computer, which would be in a fixed position and allow you to do things with text and images very similar to what you could do with your hands. And it's transitioning to the experiences that virtualization enables. So the way that we traditionally use computers and Web 2, as we say, is never going to go away. But we are going to continue to find more and more ways to get really amazing use cases out of ownership and being in a virtual place. So even though a blockchain or a token is not even remotely connected to what it takes to render a virtual experience in 3D, the two are connected because we want to, when we're in these virtual spaces, we want to be able to own things. We want to be able to track ownership and to sell things. Or even when we're in the physical space, like we just mentioned about the Prada bag, you want to be able to verify who that owner is. And so they're both are they're both linked together because these are the necessary things that we have to exist, just like we have offices at the courthouse to manage all of the deeds for the land.
It's actually interesting is like I've thought a lot about this idea that like as we build these virtual spaces, right, like one of the big advantages brands talk about is how much more data they can track in those spaces. That's been coming up a lot with the MetaQuest Pro, and like there's like 2,000 extra points of data or something that you can track on a person that you couldn't track before, and that's a whole new piece of their monetization model on selling data. It's also something where it's like when you walk around on the streets, like if I walk downtown San Diego versus if I'm walking in a metaverse environment, those aren't the same, right? Like in San Diego, I'm not being tracked on every movement that I'm making. I'm actually in that space in reality. There's laws that create the social norms and what we're allowed to and not allowed to do. And then if you walk into a business, those rules change ever so slightly based on the rules of that business or of that person's home or whatever it is that you're walking into. And so I wonder how we strike that balance of like the rules and guidelines of a metaverse versus not. And maybe the blockchain is a way to decentralize that a bit. Is that like one of the things that people talk about when they talk about ownership of data, not just ownership of a physical asset?
I think there's kind of a balancing that's happening right now, or an evolutionary process where people try different products with different features, and then we see if it works, and if it doesn't, it fades into oblivion. And that's definitely what we're seeing with blockchain right now around a lot of things, especially in virtual spaces. So I think that there's going to be kind of a shakeup until we find where we're getting the most value from using these types of things. And I am concerned about the data that's being tracked, and it's something that organizations who are launching these experiences need to take into account, especially, if you're building an experience and it's going to run on, let's say, Meta's hardware, then, and I am a proud MetaQuest Pro owner,
good for
then,
you. There's still a lot of people that haven't even tried one. I know people that are 10 years, 20 years in the space who haven't even had one on yet.
Have you tried it yet?
I haven't. No, I'm one of the people that hasn't,
Oh, wow.
hasn't tried one on. I was thinking about it. I had that Christmas money come in. I was like, maybe it's time.
Well, you have to think about it as a brand, like what's best for your audience and your users and what you want to expose them to. And then you also need to think about the experiences that you're building and saying, are we being responsible with this data? Are our partners responsible with the data that we're sharing with them? Because you want to protect the people that you're working with. There have been a lot of scams in this space as it develops, and charlatans take advantage of it. But there are steps that we can take to be responsible for our audiences and to protect them from harm. And so That's one of the things that is really important to me that I'm setting up in our organization is responsible metaverse. What are our principles? What are our guidelines for doing that? What are best practices?
Well, and I imagine that could be a big differentiator for you too. Like you were talking about earlier, if someone wanted to launch a program on Roblox, finding a studio that understands Roblox, that knows the slang, that understands the type of projects people are engaged with on that platform. They also need to understand like the social norms and the legal ramifications of those platforms too. Like I know Roblox was getting hit pretty hard for like child advertising or something like that, and like needing to grow up as a brand and figure out how to incorporate age detection and trying to change how they advertise slightly to match those regulations. And so I think as the space is so new, especially if you do incorporate blockchain into it, like the laws haven't all been made yet. Like some of those are changing in real time. And when you're hiring an expert to come in, that's one of the things I think that can really stand apart as an expert is like you really understand more than just how to build the experience, but also the risks of that experience and helping the brand de-risk those things.
Yeah. There's a great YouTube channel called People Make Games, and it will just make you want to raise your kids in a log cabin and never let them touch computers. They have a great expose on Roblox's terrible practices, including encouraging kids to take some dangerous risks when it comes to trading assets that change in value, basically making kids into stock traders. And then
How's
also
that different than like Yu-Gi-Oh cards though, right? Or like Magic cards or like trading cards as a kid and Pokemon. Like I feel like we've done that with physical items, even in with collectibles and action figures and all that sort of stuff, right?
yes. However, your friends didn't have $40,000. Like they tell a story. They interview this kid, who, yeah, he's like, he ran his account up to like 40 grand, and then, in like a year it's gone, and he's a kid. It didn't tell his parents he made 40 grand.
Well, there was one kid who got in trouble. He had, it was on some Twitter space with like some CPAs talking about NFT tax laws and stuff. And one of the case studies he brought up was a kid made over $250,000. He was like 12 years old, doesn't tell his parents about it. But then, you got to pay taxes on that. Like the IRS is going to come find its money, right? And it's like, okay, well, you don't want the money to necessarily go to the parents, but you need the parents to be aware of it. And how do you, as a lawyer, deal with that situation? And a lot of this is like unprecedented, brand new territory. So good point. I guess the stakes are a lot higher for the kids than dealing with maybe the most expensive trading cards, a couple $100s when it's brand new, right?
Yes. Another great video I recommend checking out is about Valve's practices for child gambling. They enable a lot of experiences on their platform for children or not children, but for people to trade video game skins in like video game matches or loot boxes and the like, and it enables a ton of underage gambling.
Well, so here's to pivot this same topic of talking about kind of kids and their role in this, because I think it's interesting. Like
kids are important to this.
Kids are super important to this, because that's one of the things the internet has struggled with forever, right? Is like especially for my generation where we're all growing up with iPads in our hands. It's like you literally have access to your parents say no TV for you, go to your room, and I'm watching DVDs on my PSP while I'm going to sleep, right? Like it's impossible to not have access to some of these things. You're not allowed to watch that movie. Go to your friend's house and you still get to watch it, right? Now you don't even need that. You just pull your phone out, go on the internet. And in many ways, we were actually raised by the internet. Sorry, a little bit of a rant, but it's like if I had a question, like didn't even necessarily need to ask my parents or a teacher or whatever. You could just Google it. So a lot of the wisdom of this entire generation was given to them by the internet. So I think that a totally interesting thought experiment here. Have you ever read the book Ender's Game or watched the movie?
Yes, both. Actually, pretty recently.
Okay, so Ender's Game, for those that don't know, it's a science fiction book that was then turned into a movie. Basically, this kid leads a group of other kids in a game to stop like an alien invasion. But in reality, it's not a game, and he's legitimately the general running the defense of this invasion, and it's legitimate warfare, but it's gamified. He thinks it's a game, but it's not. And there's all of this education being done with Minecraft now, with kids in elementary school building cities and managing resources. And I wonder if there's an Ender's Game situation here, or we start getting kids doing their learning and development in a game environment, and then our actual society can get this crowdsourced pool of ideas of these creative thinkers that aren't stuck in social norm boxes yet. And maybe there's amazing ideas to be pulled from kids solving world problems.
It'd be amazing if you could crack that. Like, how do you access this pool of creativity?
Right? Because if there's anything kids excel at, it's creativity, right? Like, they don't have the same life experience that professionals do, and like the tactical stuff, right, of implementing and execution of these big ideas. They're never going to be able to do that if they're 6 years old, right? Plus, they're never going to have the drive or the interest in it. They're too busy playing with action figures or stuffed animals or whatever. But that creativity is there, and if you get millions and millions of kids, especially that haven't created all those social biases yet of society, there's got to be something there.
Well, what we do is we figure out a way to get some outputs from these kids, and then we feed it into an AI, and that will be what's useful. We'll teach it execution.
That's what you got to do. That's what, well, because oh wow, okay, yeah, implementing AI into it to pull out the good ideas. I love it. It came full circle.
Yes.
I'm just going to check my notes and see if there's anything specific I want to jump on. Ecosystem strategy. Okay, so this is something I know you have a lot of thoughts on, and I'm very, very excited to get your take. So whenever new markets emerge, there's this idea of like building the pie versus taking from the pie, right? And I think with a market like the metaverse being this new, everyone benefits from that pie getting bigger. Like, it's one of the most collaborative environments I've ever worked in. Like, you're still competing for deals and stuff, but the reality is your competitor's success right now is your success. You want as many people getting involved, adopting, growing. Not to mention, it's very convoluted. There's so many different platforms to host experiences in. There's so many different building tools, so many different agencies, so many different brands. There's a lot of variety in the different players that are involved in this game. So what are your thoughts on this ecosystem? Like, what are some of the key categories of players that are involved? And your thoughts on how important it is to collaborate amongst those players?
So, as we were talking about the labor needs for Metaverse earlier and how do you find that ideal team, it is one. So I think that Metaverse is combining so many different technologies together that it really requires a what we call an ecosystem. So a group of organizations that each have their own specializations to deliver it. It's not unlike making an automobile, because automobiles are very complex machines that involve computing and everything else. And there are so many organizations involved in that supply chain in order to get one vehicle made. And so for organizations that are building for Metaverse, it is useful to think first about how you can leverage an ecosystem approach to get efficiencies from that, to get talent from that, and to be able to deliver superior products. Now, there are already some, product as a service type products where, like if it's a Metaverse platform and you just need a place for your team to meet, then maybe you just need to create an office space that looks like you, or a space that represents your brand, and you can meet there, and you're good, you're done, you just pay the hosting, and that's it. It's you and your team. But for a lot of other organizations, for organizations that are involved in ongoing tokenized marketing engagements or a digital twin situation for manufacturing, it really helps to find the right partners to help you deliver. And also, as we talked about earlier, for people who are launching in-game experiences, it really helps to have people that know that community. So bringing in those people as well to help you execute. And you get to drive, and you get to say, this is how our brand does it. You can leverage some of your creative. But at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones that make or break that experience because they know that community.
I think that makes a ton of sense. So essentially, there's some all-in-one type tools that have started emerging, and like I have some in mind. But what would you consider to be like an all-in-one tool, like that basic, like you just need to host a space for a social engagement or for an event or something? Like, what would be your top 3 or 4 of those?
Right now, my top for people who just want to jump into an event with someone is going to be spatial. I love that because it runs so well on mobile, desktop, inside of a browser, and also on a headset. I will say the headset experience is not amazing. And then I'm a big fan of AltSpace VR. It feels dated and clunky, but it is rock solid. And when it comes to creating things for it, it's pretty intuitive. And I just haven't seen something that gives you as much flexibility as it does. And that's it. I don't have a third.
And for those two, I'm also a big fan of spatial. I've used them a fair amount. I've got my exclusive penthouse. So at some point, by the way, we still got to do a little social gathering, get some of these thought leaders in there.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Little party on a rooftop in virtual Dubai. But from a builder's perspective, do these tools have, or do you find that these platforms have enough to do custom branding and personalization? Or the second you want to start getting into like any customization, would you recommend you really need to like, okay, start thinking about that ecosystem of an Unreal team or a Unity team or an agency?
I still haven't seen a metaverse environment that I think does branding well. Let me know if you find one. I think from a design perspective, there's so many ways that you could bring in a brand's colors and the types of shapes that it evokes from its logo and brand elements. And so far, I've seen a lot of logos in spaces, but the space itself is disconnected from that theme. But this is just such a huge missed opportunity for any company that's wanting to meet or onboard employees or even have some type of a vendor engagement.
Yeah, I think the two easiest ways to do it, from my perspective, number one is digital twins. I think that's the most straightforward. You've already built physical spaces that are on brand. Like, you hired some architect and paid them way too much money to design whatever corporate headquarters or building that you have, or your executive briefing center that you fly out all these incredible executives to come buy your products or your offerings. So I think brands already have spaces.
I want to go on record and just say that digital twinning your office is a bad idea, and I'll fight you.
Okay,
on that.
wait, let's hear it.
Okay.
Why is it a bad idea?
So yeah, I got in some really heated discussions back when I was at Accenture with some people about this, but I don't want to go to the office in the metaverse. There's nothing about that sounds like a good experience to me, and I can't imagine that I'm alone. I feel like, if that's what the metaverse is going to be, I don't want a part of it. I want to be able to live within the space where anything is possible, that the only limit is your imagination. And whenever I show up in a digital twin, I'm just like, wow, what a missed opportunity.
So I hear you there. I get the point you're trying to make, and I agree with it in spirit. So I think that one example is at TouchCast, we had this digital twin of a Microsoft store. And in that Microsoft store, it's a digital twin. So you have tables and you have chairs like you would if you're going into a store. But as an avatar, do you really need to sit in any of those chairs? Do you need to set anything on those tables? Like, maybe not. Maybe there's a more creative way that you could showcase products in the metaverse outside of a standard physical reality. But I think at first, because so many people are new to adopting this experience, you kind of have to give them less reasons to feel like it's fake. So you kind of replicate reality in a way that makes them feel comfortable, so that they're like, oh, this feels like a room I've been in before. This feels like a space I know. And then over this next couple of years, as people get more in tune with using these environments, I think we'll get more and more creative ideas. That said, when I talk to companies about digital twins of office spaces, the area I always encourage them to focus on is more like executive briefing centers. Because they're still an office environment, they're still a physical building, but they're built a little differently than like a cubicle zone of like a bunch of people with the same exact desk and computer. Usually it's more of like an experience. Like, I did a tour of one here in San Diego where each room is meant to put the customer in like an emotional state of like, hey, we're welcoming you into this environment, and we're kind of putting you in the zone of the type of information we're about to talk about today. Oh, let's show you a little bit of the voice of the customer in this showcase room that's got these unique like holographic screens and displays and whatnot. And Then let's pull you into more of a collaborative room that's more of like an area for us to brainstorm ideas together. And oh, this one's more like a living room or like a cafe, like a more social kind of area to make you feel really comfortable and you can really digest the information we just went through together. And so when I think of digital twinning into these virtual spaces, that's more where my head goes, is like you've probably spent over $1 million building that space easily. Like some people spend $200 million on a corporate headquarters or building. It's like the cost of reproducing that in a virtual environment and then customizing the rooms is a fraction. Like we're talking less than a percentage point of the purchase of that building to replicate it digitally. And the use cases you can get out of it are huge. Like not even necessarily like an office space. And I know I'm going off a little bit here, but think about cruise ships. Like we just saw Celebrity Cruise launch this with Surreal. Like if you take a digital twin of a cruise ship, all of a sudden you can train people before the boat's even been made yet. Like you can actually do a virtual tour and sell tickets before the boat exists. And it's so much more immersive than a brochure or a pamphlet or like a magazine, right? Like you can actually give them a sense of being in that environment. So I think for virtual tours, like there's something there, but I hear you on like, you don't want someone sitting on if our future of the metaverse is someone sitting at a desk that's a digital twin of a desk with a digital monitor in front of them, that's depressing. Like we don't need that.
Yeah, and that's a good point too about the executive briefing centers. They're already looking like they're from the space age, right? The other thing too, I will add, I like your point about it has to be grounded in reality to encourage adoption. And you're right, we have to have reality anchors. We have to be able to set and to meet expectations. And I think that some of that setting and meeting of expectations happens in ways that we aren't fully equipped to imagine. So like an experience that John Carmack talks about this, the previous CTO of Meta, I'll just leave that there. So he talked about in one of his speeches, he said that Beat Saber is really successful. And by the way, I think it's probably the most successful VR game of all time. And it doesn't look like anything you've ever seen anywhere, right? But he says it's successful because every expectation that it sets, it meets. So a lot of other virtual reality experiences have it where you're inside of an experience and then you move the little stick on your controller and now you're moving forward. Well, there is nothing about your biology or anything that is set to expect you to move forward when you're standing still, and that's why people get sick. Well, that doesn't happen in Beat Saber. You're static. The next thing is we know that a lightsaber will cut through anything. So when the block comes towards us and then we hit it and we feel a vibration in our hand, all of our expectations are met. And he was just saying, that it's just those two mechanics right there makes it one of the greatest VR experiences ever made because it doesn't break immersion.
That makes so much sense to me. And it's actually funny because I'm like the resident VR guy that's like showing people VR for the first time, like as I'm sure you are in many of your friend groups as well. But my favorite first game to show people is actually Angry Birds. As kind of ridiculous as that sounds, it's like
I never played it.
It's very similar to what you described in the sense that you're stationary. Like you can stand in 3 different spots, but it kind of feels natural to be like I'm teleporting to a new vantage point to kind of look down at the pigs and the structures that you're aiming to go attack. But the reason I love showing it to people is for the spatial immersion. It's amazing because you're looking down at something that is still 3D. It's almost like you're in a museum looking at a piece of art or like an exhibit. It like draws your focus into one space, but at the same time, it's incredibly 3-dimensional. So like it gives you that sense of I'm in a new environment looking into this little 3D space now. And because you're bigger than it, you also feel kind of almost godlike, like it's less intimidating. And then the motion you're doing, similar to the lightsaber, it's like you have a slingshot with a bird and then you pull and you shoot it and it feels very human. It doesn't feel like it's a missed expectation. So that makes a lot of sense to me. It's like matching the expectation up front and then building a world or an environment that is aligned with that is very important.
Right. And you can't sit on chairs in the office. So that's a good point there as well. Like VR chairs are pointless, but we probably need something to fill the space, right? So we feel comfortable, like an at ease.
Totally. Like in my penthouse, why do I have a bedroom? I'm never gonna lay down and sleep in that bed, like ever. Like it's a completely useless room, but it gets the idea across that there's a penthouse here. Like one of the things with Engage XR, another platform that I'm getting really excited about, is they have this demo that I did recently where they have like a digital twin of a city, and then they throw that city out, and it's like a 1-to-1 to scale model, and it's just all of a sudden you're standing next to this city, and you're like, whoa, that's kind of cool. But then they can create like a helicopter, and you can get in the helicopter, and as weird as it is, like I'm just standing in my room, it still triggers this feeling of flight as we fly around this city in this helicopter looking out the window. Like, to be fair, I'd already been in the environment for 45, 50 minutes, but like there are these little tricks that you can think outside of physics, right? And like the helicopter makes it feel like, oh, I've seen movies before, I've been in a plane, I've been in things similar enough to understand I'm in a flying thing that can fly. But the fact that you feel it, the fact that it creates this like emotional reaction, or even a physical reaction when you're still standing in the same place, like there are these little tricks that I think you can do to play around with that.
Yes. Have you ever played the Vader Immortal series? I think we're just going way off topic now, but
that's all right. I mean, look, we're an hour and a half in, and I think
do we need to find a way to close this out?
Yeah, one of our last notes of things to talk about was what was it? We were talking about. I think this is your term, crap chicken NFTs. So maybe we'll give it like 5-10 minutes just to like share some random NFT projects or fun VR games and kind of close out on that.
Yeah, so I recently bought a crap chicken.
Is it literally crap chicken? Is that the name of the project?
That's the name of the project. Crap spelled with a K.
Oh my God. See, I thought you were just saying some malarkey term.
No.
I thought that was just like a personality thing.
No, I have a friend who, he texts me and he's just like, hey man, you got to buy this NFT. And he's been doing this for like a year. And I've never bought an NFT that he said to buy. And every single one that he told me to buy, like went to the moon. And I was just like, wow, I should probably listen to this guy. So he texts me, he's like, hey man, buy a crap chicken. And it's from Dan Harmon, the guy who does Rick and Morty, big Rick and Morty fan. So it's from a new show he's coming out with called Crapopolis. I'm concerned. I don't think this one's going to the moon. It's not even fully minted. Like it's been out for, I don't know, like 6 months. It's not 6 months. It's been out since November. And there's 14,000 they're supposed to mint. They've only minted like 4,000. But I'm really impressed with the experience. Like they really thought it out. They built it on this SaaS platform for launching NFT projects on the Ethereum network. And I was really impressed because I was digging into that. It's by Fox Blockchain Labs and so Fox the network, and they're building it on this SaaS platform. And I was like, I didn't know SaaS existed to launch NFT stuff. So it makes it pretty easy to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Of course, you've got to do your side of delivery for benefits to your community and maintaining that community. And I think they're doing a really excellent job at that. So you can access, as a holder of the NFT, I can watch clips from the show before the show comes out, and they're like storyboarded, like pencil tests. Like it's like, we're seeing this stuff as they're producing the show, and that's pretty cool.
See, I think that anything any marketers can take out of what's happened with NFTs, regardless if you believe in blockchain and tokenization or any of this stuff, the community forward mindset and the telling, or not the telling, but the sharing of stories as they happen, that is the biggest takeaways I've gotten from why these projects have done so well. Is like you're basically allowing your customer to be a part of the process. Like and there's this resume that was a total meme. It was a joke that went viral on LinkedIn. And basically it had listed that the person's experience was like Netflix, Apple, Google, Amazon, but it was like Netflix account manager, binges shows grandma how to watch the TV or whatever, Apple customer support specialist for my relatives. Like it's basically they're just a customer of each of these brands, but bullet pointing out the value they provide back to the brand. And even though it's a joke and it's hilarious to see it, it's such a great lens to look at business. It's like your customers are more than customers. They're more than just revenue. They're actually doing all these other things. And if you make them feel like they're a part of that process, if you tap into that value that they're providing, they're more likely to provide more of it. That's where this organic word of mouth and people wanting to post about it as much as possible, people wanting to share it. Like, for most projects, they're not actually investors of that project. It's not a security. It's not a stock. They're a customer who bought a digital asset, a digital product from the brand, but they feel like an investor. They feel like they have equity in it because you gave them that sense of belonging, that sense that we're sharing this together.
Yes. And I will say, too, that, I mean, I am a big Dan Harmon fan. Like, I like his show, Solar Opposites, as well. And I've rewatched that and Rick and Morty more times than I can count. But that aside, I found myself engaging with this beyond reasons of, like, I like Dan Harmon. Like, I'm not that obsessed with him. And the reason is because I actually ended up buying 2 of these things. The first is because...
It's never just one. It's never just one.
I have a good reason. So the first is because, like, I don't do a lot of NFT trading. I don't have that many. And I was like, how do I buy one of these NFTs? And I placed an offer on the OpenSea portfolio, and I actually ended up getting one under the mint price. And I did well. But then I was like, you know what? I want to mint one. I want to have the mint experience. So I went and bought another one. I was like, these are going to go to the moon anyway, right? So now I have 2 crap chickens. So I found myself just like opening my phone and then going to MetaMask and then pulling it up and being like, I've got a JPEG of a chicken. Like, what can I do with this? And so then I find myself going back to the Crab Chicken website, logging in with my MetaMask account, and then going to all the unique benefits of it. And I'm getting deeper and deeper and deeper into being a fan of the show before the show even comes out. And then I'm also asking myself, like, okay, well, what can I do with it? And I find out that every day that I have my crap chickens, they lay a crap egg. And so I have these little tokens in my wallet now that are called crap eggs. So I get 2 every day because I've got 2 chickens. And now there's a shop that I can visit where I can buy benefits. So I can literally buy like a gold picture frame for one of my chickens with 150 crap eggs. I probably have enough now to go buy it. I can go do that. So, like, there's different things that kind of gamify the experience.
It's the Dave and Buster's coins. That's what these brands are doing with the constant staking. And my buddy was in a project called Creeps a long time ago, which now actually, I think they're doing a great job. They've pulled in some agencies to help them. They're taking it seriously to build like a legit brand around what they've created so far. But they had created this token and this staking mechanism before that got oversaturated. And it was an accident. This wasn't supposed to make their users rich. It was just supposed to be a part of their ecosystem so that when they launch more products that they could have their own currency to be a part of that process, almost like credits, like the Dave and Buster's thing. But what ended up happening is someone created a liquidity pool so that you could sell those tokens called Lumi tokens. And there were people making thousands of dollars a day just like staking Lumi tokens, then selling them for Ethereum and flipping them into cash until it all eventually crashed the same way that we've seen with Luna and everything else.
I mean, nothing in arbitrage is permanent.
Yeah, the difference is this was an accident. It wasn't malicious or anything. But yeah, none of those arbitrage things work forever. They can't. It's more like as long as you, and this is where the expectation setting thing you said is so important. It's like if you don't expect the crap eggs to be worth thousands of dollars, you just see them as this is a crap egg that I can use to buy more
it's in the
merch or experiences that are a part of this, then you're not dissatisfied. Then you're okay with it because you know what you're getting into when you get into it. I got very lucky, actually. I bought a couple of these genuine Undead NFTs, these kind of pixel art skulls. And it was a total random purchase. I just saw them on the cover of OpenSea, really liked the art, and I purely bought them for the art. They were very, very cheap, and I was like, whatever, they're cool. Who knows what'll happen? And I ended up spending $300 and selling them for $5,500 4 months later. And that was huge for me. Like, I mean, in a process where, like, end of year, like, need a little extra savings and, like, hoping to get some extra cash. Like,
wait, was this 21 or 22?
This was last year. This is 22. This is
Holy
November.
Crap. Wow.
November.
Okay.
Yeah. In the bear market, man. But the reason I brought that project up wasn't to brag about my come up. It's because the way they've approached it is like there was an artist that put the art out, and there was no utility, no campaign, and basically he was just like, I'm going to put this art out into the world. It got a lot of popularity. People bought it, and then he didn't want anything to do with creating utility or managing a community. So like 5 super fans of the art made the Discord and actually created the community. So there was no founding team. basically you just had an art fan club develop into a company, into a real project. And so many people got excited enough about that story and excited enough about the art to where it became this collective, almost decentralized organization, essentially a DAO, that is now just getting to a point where they're starting to do things and host meetups, and like people are recreating art influenced by the project, and they're putting them on and kind of giving them a place to show off that creativity. And I think that's another one of these amazing things that comes from community platforms, and like this community forward mindset is like you can really just get a large group of people from all over the world that have a similar interest or this one thing that they're all into, and then they can go build stuff and like create really incredible things.
Yeah, I want to say something to any marketers that are listening and are hearing about this community benefit too. So I've been a serious critic of NFTs until I bought a crap chicken. And it's because NFTs have the worst possible user experience, and there has been no effort in the past year and a half to make it any better. Like, they've got like exposed keys and things that are used all the time to authenticate transactions in the back end for traditional systems that no one has to see, but we have to see it. And anyway, it's ridiculous. And I'm a very outspoken critic about this. But what I found with that experience was that because I was so invested, like I'd sunk so much cash into this, like I was visiting that website many times and I was paying them. So that's just a big win right there. And there's this sense too of like being elite. Like you and I, Ricky, are better than everybody else because we know how to do Web3. Like we've cracked the code. And so whenever we're a part of these communities, we feel like as if we're a part of something like a Soho House or something, you know, which is just a very, very exclusive club for people that can afford to be a part of it. And we can afford to be a part of it because of our knowledge about the space. And so if you have a product or a service that intersects with this nerdy group of people that are willing to do the work, you're going to have a very engaged community. And this is going to be a wave that we can ride for some time because, like I said, the UX is just not getting any better, but the popularity is still there.
Well, and we just saw the first uptick in NFT volume last month that we've seen, I think the last like 4 or 5 months. First time we've seen it actually go up in volume, which is crazy. I was very surprised to see that because I still think the industry is mostly overrun. Now that we're on the NFT subject, I think it's mostly overrun with rug pulls and kind of nonsense and some accidental rug pulls. Like we were talking about how there's a lot of kids in this space. Like I think that some of these scams and these kind of money grabs are really just a 12-year-old kid who had really big ideas that he didn't know were as hard as they were to deliver on. And he basically got $1 million, $2 million and then was like, oh my God, like all these people expect so many things of me. How do I deliver? And then he can't. And that's probably not more than half of them, but there's a decent amount of these projects that I think were more accidents that were like well-intentioned people that messed up. Or
did you see Tim Ferriss's project?
I did not.
Oh, he did something with like, I don't know, there's like a digital rooster or something. I'm just in this chicken NFT world. So he basically wrote though on his website, he was like, I'm going to be engaged with this and I'm going to keep supporting this project until I get bored with it. So he's like, you can buy in and be a part of it or not. I don't care. And I was just like, at least he's being honest. You know, he's not just going to disappear on us. Well, he will, but he's letting us know he will.
Well, I love the honesty thing. It's like as long as you're straight up about what you're doing, then it's okay. Like you don't have to promise a bunch of utility to sell an NFT, right? Like you can just make art. And that's where I think the NFTs have a place for artists. I think especially these one-of-one artists, not these massive generative 10,000 PFP collections, but like someone who's really making unique art and wants to sell it digitally, especially like some of these new styles of art that have come from digital art. So there's like this one woman who does VR painting and literally puts on shows where you can watch her in VR painting these incredible three-dimensional masterpieces that you couldn't do in real life. Like it's a unique form of art.
Yeah, and I've seen her stuff. I don't know her name, but like it is a whole new genre of art.
I wish I could give her the shout out, but it's great. Like I love the art that she creates. And then there's some with 2D graphic design that you zoom in and you zoom in and you zoom in. It's this endless stream of images the deeper you zoom in to certain pieces of the art. And if you can put those on chain and verify them as these tokens, and then potentially give a benefit to customers of that art or a royalty back to the artist if it flips for 10 times what they originally sold it for, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think there's real utility in creating a standardized process around that. And I've talked to art galleries and people that curate this stuff in the physical art world, and they're all thinking about it, and this makes a lot of sense. In the business world with royalty programs, loyalty programs like what we see with Starbucks and Polygon, I think that there is a real benefit in those spaces. But the world of 10,000 PFP JPEGs and derivative artwork, I think all of that we're going to continue to see phase out over the next 6 months to a year. Hopefully.
Crap. Okay. My chicken was one of those projects. So I'm very interested to see what happens with Starbucks, because I'm asking myself the question, like, you know, if you put the loyalty program on a blockchain and you verify ownership and you allow people to trade rewards, will they?
So this is what I've been curious about, because the Starbucks, like, I don't want to put Starbucks on blast here, but I think people talk about this often enough. They're essentially an unregulated bank. Like, their loyalty program is their biggest revenue model. Like, it's billions of dollars a year that are essentially loaned to them by customers that they can then take those billions of dollars, do whatever they want with. And
you're not putting them on blast. Anyone who has a gift card is doing that. That's companies.
They've just done it better.
Yes. Yeah. They probably have like more than everybody else.
I know
they've got some of my money.
Well, the concept of float cash is super real, right? So there's like 18% of that money never gets spent ever. And so to go back to your question, I'm wondering if this solves the float cash problem for consumers. If people that have that float cash can have a way of sharing it or dispensing it back to people. But the question is, will they? Like is the float cash there because someone just didn't have enough money to spend, or is it there because someone never logs back into their account and never engages? So I'm super curious to see whether Starbucks points end up ever being transferred around, or if that's something that is just theoretical.
I think it'd be bad for the stock price if it did happen.
Yeah, if float cash disappeared.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a big hit to every company. They've been making, like you said, 18% off of these sold gift cards or programs every year. It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
No, that's why, I don't know. Like, I'm skeptical. All the blockchain stuff, I'm very interested in it. I want to have more conversations on this podcast with people that know more about it than I do, so I can broaden my perspective on it. But I am approaching it with a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of the space that is trying to kind of make up solutions. I think there's some of the space that's focusing on real problems and trying to fix them, but maybe this happened with the internet too, and it's happened with all sorts of things. But I think there's a lot of builders out there that are just so geeked out about what they're building that they're just like, but what about this feature? And what about that feature? And they're building for themselves instead of thinking about the problems that a consumer might face, or what can they build to impact the industry rather than something that's just technically cool.
Yeah. And also just thinking through the user experience, and not just when they're using your product, but thinking about how do we, if your product, for instance, is a specific event, then, what are we doing before the event to get them ready? What does their experience look like as they're preparing for it? And then how are we following up with them to keep them engaged, things like that. And there's so many different technologies that come into play when you're doing that. And I'm a marketing guy, so I always think about that. And like you said, if at the end of the day you're just saying, what's the use of meeting in a virtual space? It's not the right question. The right question is, what can we use to enhance experiences across every touch point that we have with this person?
I love that you zoomed us out like that, because I think that's important, is thinking about what your employee's journey, what your buyer's journey is. You're already engaging with them. You're already engaging with them digitally, whether it's through your website or through literal video calls. So what are the things that you can do to make those experiences more immersive, more engaging, and thinking about where a VR headset can fit into that versus where can more of an online gaming-esque experience fit into that? Where does a token gated program fit into that? It's more about taking the existing journey and enhancing it rather than trying to recreate some new channel or some completely new journey just for the sake of it.
And then like you were saying earlier, how does a company find how do they find where their best use case is going to be if they say we want to do a metaverse thing, but what do we do? There's so much. One thing you could say is like, look at our existing processes, the things that we know are making us money that help us operate, and then try to find just pieces of that process and say, what can we do? If we took this little slice right here and put it onto the blockchain, right? Like Starbucks didn't put their supply chain on the blockchain, but they did do their loyalty program. And so there's things that you could look at like that.
Most definitely. It's a big thing with stuff like lab equipment in the healthcare space, or in like criminal labs and things like that. It's like at some point you're going to have to get them in front of that piece of equipment if it's a new innovative equipment, so that they can test it and try it out and train them on it and things like that. But if you can delay the buying process to get that in front of them and take that cost on until they're 99% of the way through and they're going to buy it, that'll help you actually run a more efficient sales process for those types of products, because now you can show them the digital version earlier and replace that step. And then all those people that were like 80% likely to convert or 70% likely to convert, that you were spending all this money on travel and getting them in front of that product, now you're not spending that. You don't have that lost conversion. You don't have that added cost anymore. So I think there's a lot of things to consider in your buyer's journey, and like thinking about your actual process. Where do these technologies fit in? But that said, Nate, we were almost at 2 hours. This has been an awesome conversation. We'll definitely have to run it back at some point. But before we end it out, is there anything you want to share as far as like where people can find you, stuff you're working on? Like, I always like to give people an opportunity to plug something if you have anything you want to share.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to congratulate our listener for making it all the way to the end. But yes, if you'd like to connect with me, check it out at linkedin.com/ is it slash, or is there like another letter like Reddit?
I think
I'm going to make you edit the heck out of this.
It's linkedin.com/in/Nate.
Yes.
SSIN/. I'll throw it in the description.
Yeah, so my name is Nate Essin. That's ESSIN. I smashed the Nate and Essin together, so there's only one E in the middle. NateEssin.com, LinkedIn.com/IN/Nate
I hope that's not your email, buddy.
No, my email is Nate.Essin. It gets confusing.
That's a little easier.
Ricky, thanks for hosting me on this show and for allowing me to be your inaugural guest. It's an honor.
No, this is awesome. I couldn't think of a better person for episode 1. Hopefully we'll have a chance to circle back to you at some point here. Otherwise, much love, brother. Have a great one.
Thank you.